Thank you, Mariam. I'm extremely humble for the invitation from the American Institute of Architects, and particularly from the AIA Middle East chapter. And I want to thank the excellent organization team in Doha and Oman, Muscat, and also Abu Dhabi. It's really a great honor for me. And I think also this is the very first event since we started 2021. So Happy New Year for everyone. And let's cross fingers that this would be, inshallah, a much better year. As Mariam shared with you, I am so excited about sharing the story of Qatar, particularly the notion of architecture and urbanism in the contemporary paradigm. But I want to do that first by doing a bit of setting the stage for a more contextual understanding of what is happening in the Gulf. And when you look at the title of my lecture, it's suggesting a lot of issues, suggesting a move from the oil paradigm, from focusing on oil as the backbone of the economy of the Gulf, to a shift towards people. And by people here, I'm extending the notion of people to talk about locals and expats and so on. And the other interesting thing, seems to me, in the title is that we need also to revisit the role of architecture and urbanism in this new paradigm that we are approaching, which is, again, in my title, I'm suggesting that we should call it the post-carbon paradigm. But just to give you a sense of how my mission is kind of hard, let me share with you how the top travel advisor, Lonely Planet, placed the city of Doha only in 1998. It was selected to be on the list of one of the most boring cities on earth. So look at that. Very tough job that I have to do with you to show you what happened through the last 2 decades, and to which extent investing in architecture and urbanism can really change the narrative of a city, can change the story of a city. With that said, as I promised, I want to contextualize the notion first, and therefore part of the effort that I want to share with you today is related to the perceptions that we have, either in the Middle East and definitely on a global level regarding the Middle East and particularly the Gulf. So either we still subscribe to what I call the Orientalist perception, the whole notion of the Arabian myth and the desert and the nomads and the camels and so on and so forth. Or we are still excited about what I call the mental image that these guys, they only have money. They have oil and they have money and there are consumers and they have nothing to offer. So it seems to me that in most of the time, in most of the situations, we are in a very defensive positions, people in the Gulf and people in the Middle East, because we are sort of torn apart between those two perceptions. But if you look at the history of Gulf cities, you would realize that, on the contrary, those are very interesting communities. They had an interesting relation with nature. They were able to form harmonious communities, speaking to the surroundings, speaking to the climatic condition, speaking to the social requirements. And then suddenly, there was what I called it the sudden modernity. And I like this image so much because, as you can see on my caption, it's sort of depicting or documenting the icons of modernity, particularly the oil pipe, the plane, the car, and the wonderful Bedouin excited about the plane and excited about the whole page and the whole new chapter that Gulf cities are approaching. And you cannot imagine the impact of such sudden modernity. And I want to share with you here the work of the outstanding writer Abdurrahman Munayif in his great novel, Cities of Salt, where he was able to depict that this change was so profound because it was a change on a cultural level, physical level, social level, economical level, and even also the physical level, which is much more important to us as architects and designers, how the city, its spaces and its image radically changed. And speaking of novels, this is also another interesting novel called Tsunami, and it was written by a writer who decided to use a fake name, and I will explain exactly why he did that. Because when you start to flip the pages of the early pages of the novel, he portrayed a very dramatic scene in 2195, so almost 200 years from today. And this dramatic image that he portrayed for us is showing a line of Saudi young men waiting in front of the Bangladeshi embassy, trying to get a visa to go to Dhaka, Bangladesh to work as drivers. Very, very dramatic image. But the reason for this start of the novel is that Hamoud al-Sayiq, he was trying to suggest that we are approaching a different paradigm. We are approaching a paradigm where oil is not going to help anymore. So I would consider this novel as a big red flag, a very loud ringing bell, in the sense that it was really suggesting that all the Gulf cities, they should look for a new paradigm. Parallel to that, we saw the decline in oil prices, but more importantly, it's not only about the decline of prices, but it's also about the relevance of oil. This is an image of the very first solar-powered plane that took a trip around the world, and it started actually from Abu Dhabi. The first very leg was from Abu Dhabi to Muscat, Oman. And it did the whole trip without using a single drop of oil. So this is in itself was a manifestation of the new paradigm is not only approaching, we are actually living this new paradigm of the post-oil or the post-carbon. And as you can see here, the irony is the plane was flying on top of all the glassy skyscrapers that we built all over the Gulf because of the petrodollars or the oil revenues. So the post-carbon paradigm is real, and hence we have to start looking at the role of architecture and urbanism in envisioning this new kind of city, the new future city, the post-oil city, the post-carbon city. And in my extended research in analyzing the Gulf cities, I was able through the last decade to see three main paradigms very clear to me. And although one might question how we can have three paradigms in just 10 years, in one decade, and I think this is the uniqueness about Gulf cities, the pace of development, incredible pace of development. And in some cases, we were not able to pose and ask questions and evaluate and assess what exactly we're doing. So the very first paradigm was related to the phenomena that I would call it Dubaification of Gulf cities. How suddenly Dubai became a sort of an urban brand, a model for development. And Dubai was able to do that by using iconic development, real estate fantasies, and then it was dramatically hit by the financial crisis. And I will elaborate. And the second paradigm is related to the whole notion of sustainability and the green movement, and how some projects in the Gulf were trying to go for a green agenda, go for sustainable development promises. And then the last paradigm, which is I can see echoed and manifested in some Gulf cities now, is related to the rise of the knowledge economy and how to be much more prepared for the post-carbon paradigm. And we all witnessed the first paradigm, Dubaification, and how iconic development, including the famous palms, the world map kind of iconic real estate development, the notion of the vertical development and Sheikh Zayed and all the skyscrapers there. And literally, Dubai became a sort of an urban brand and a model. And this model created very interesting kind of competition between Gulf cities and even beyond. Who would build more? Who would build bigger? Who would build higher? So instead of really resorting to the Gulf cooperation kind of culture, this model created a lot of competition between Gulf cities, and they started exactly to do the elements that was suggested in Dubai's model, particularly iconic development. This is the project in Bahrain, vertical development all over the Middle East. This is the project that was announced in the same day of the inauguration of Burj Dubai, and now it's Burj Khalifa. This is the Burj Al Mamlaka in Saudi Arabia, because Amir Walid ibn Talal, when he heard that Dubai's tower is 880 meters, he decided to go for what he called it the 1 kilometer meter, or 1,000 meter height tower. And amazingly, this model was extended even beyond the Gulf. This is one of the posters that I found doing my research about the impact of Dubai. That was in Pakistan. Some leaders in their election campaigns, they were promising the voters that if you would elect me to be your new prime minister, I will transform Peshawar and Lahore into new Dubai. Very, very interesting. Or even in cities with a lot of cultural sophistication and even architecture and urban sophistication like Cairo, and suddenly you have a project called Dubai along the Nile. This is the vision of Cairo in 2050, or the new capital that it's under construction now, which is again a sort of an extension of this Dubaification phenomena. And amazingly, when you look at some of the ads regarding all of these iconic development, this is the ad that I documented related to the project, the Palm, and they were comparing between the past and the future or the present. And they were saying this project is about Dubai's history meets its future. And it's amazing when you look at the black and white pictures and you compare it with the colored one, you will see a very dramatic shift from sense of community, from respecting the environment, from looking at the sea as a sort of economical base. There's a sort of a respect to the environmental aspects. And you move to the colored pictures and you would realize that this is a more manifestation of the consumption culture, the culture of individualism, the culture of if you can pay, we can serve you. If you cannot pay, you're not included. And suddenly the whole thing was dramatically affected by the global financial crunch in 2008 to 2009. And ironically, the same experts that they were saying, you guys are doing a wonderful job, suddenly they started to make fun of us. They started to make fun of the Gulf, fun of Dubai. And they were saying, as you can see here in the cartoon, that all what we did in terms of all of these skyscrapers are decaying, and the reality is that we ended up with asking for support and asking for money to sustain our life. And ironically, still those kind of slogans are, even after the financial crisis, is still viable. Build it and then they will come. So still we have this tendency towards building more apartments, more real estate, hoping that no bubble is going to be burst and you will continue the same pace. And this is something that we need to stop, we need to question. And in some other cases, the second paradigm was related, as I said, to the notion of sustainability. And the iconic project here was Masdar City in Abu Dhabi. But again, the project also, although started with a lot of wonderful, wonderful aspirations and promises related to the zero emissions of carbon, the zero waste, total reliance on public transportation, creating a very sustainable, interacted, productive community. But then the whole thing ended up with a sort of a shattered dream, basically, and we were not able to continue the project. One of the other venues that were tried in Gulf cities related again to the knowledge economy paradigm, how to insert interesting cultural entities within the fabric of the cities, and one of which is our museums. But the issue here is how to do or how to construct the museums that would radically affect the cultural life and affect the knowledge paradigm in those cities. And the idea also of creating universities and creating research centers. This is the case of King Abdullah Economic City and University for Science and Technology. But then here you have another dilemma also, because knowledge-based urban development is related so much to the notion of integration, not to the notion of creating a gated community where you would allow people to behave and to interact in certain manner, and you cannot allow people to do the same outside. So this is again something that is antithesis to the whole notion of knowledge economy. And therefore, I think it's important to recap on some of the important theoretical thoughts that we have to dwell on, one of which is really understanding the meaning of knowledge economy, because knowledge economy is so much related to human development, is so much related to human power, is so much related to not having more, which is the identity of people in the Gulf. We have a lot of money. We have a lot of money generated from oil. But the issue here, the main criteria here is not having more, but being more. So how you will contribute in the future of humanity, how you will have your own signature and fingerprint in the overall human project. And therefore, it's becoming important for all Gulf cities to start going back and forth between resources economy, which is basically the oil. Some of the cities started to do a bit of industry, and definitely you can also witness that there is a very tangible direction towards knowledge economy, and also going back and forth between the three kind of backbones for the economical basis of all these cities. Another very important notion, theoretical notion, that I'm so much excited about when it comes to Gulf cities is related to the demographic structures of all those cities. I mean, you're talking about cities that in the best case scenario, you will have 50% locals, 50% expats. In the case of Dubai, this percentage would go all the way to maybe 92 or 93 expats. In the case of Doha, Qatar, you're talking about 85% expats, 15% locals. So in this sense, you want to really dwell on the notion of cities for all. And as Jane Jacobs suggesting, this means that you have something for everyone. And this is because the city itself is created for everyone. Another important issue, also so much related to the Gulf cities, is related to, again, people, and again, the new paradigm that started by the wonderful interventions of Richard Florida. The first intervention was in his book, The Rise of the Creative Class, where he started to talk about the notion of place and how the notion of place is related to a new social class of people that they are not that much attached to their own countries or their own cities or the places where they were born at. They are more excited about moving to environments where those environments would nurture their creativity, would help them to maintain this creative endeavors that they are excited about. And also the work of Charles Landry, when he started to talk about the notion of the creative city and how we have to move beyond the pragmatic planning approach to cities, the notion of dividing the city into some zones, residential zone, service zone, industrial zone, and the importance of focusing on new principles like creativity, culture, design, art, heritage, and so on. And all of this effort, in my opinion, resulted in a new paradigm in planning and urbanism and even architecture, which is the notion of knowledge-based urban development. And there's a substantial literature coming now. I participated in most of those books, and this is my final book that I published in 2018, dealing with the issue of knowledge-based urban development in the Middle East. So let me now move to the narrative of Qatar. And Qatar is started also as a very, very humble traditional settlement by the Gulf. And as you can see in the architectural setting here, very, very humble architecture. The only vertical development that you can see is the minarets of the small mosques. The economical life was based on the very harsh job of fishing and pearl diving. And this is really, really harsh job. And it's a lot of suffering and a lot of effort. And in some cases, even the boats will never come back. So meeting people on the edge of the water, which called in the common language, the seaf, meeting the fishermen coming and the pearl divers coming back was like a social kind of gathering for the families celebrating and so on. And then the oil was discovered. And as you can see, once the oil discovered, you start to trace some signs of modernity. You started to see a bit of paved roads, some cars, elements suggesting new modern architecture starting to be inserted. And because of these kind of unprecedented revenues coming from oil, there was a huge trend towards the modernization of the city. And therefore, literally, the city jumped every decade. And it was a huge jump in terms of how to provide housing, to provide main services, schools, roads, hospitals, and so on. And this has resulted in incredible horizontal development. This is a map of the traditional settlement that I showed you your pictures, its picture 5 slides ago. And this is the old center in contemporary Doha now. So you can imagine that all of this is the outcome of the last 6 or 7 decades. Incredible pace of development, incredible horizontal sprawl of the city. If you look at the skyline of Doha, you would also realize that the same pace of development took place, and particularly took place in the direction that I called it before, the Dubaification of Gulf cities. So you can see here, only in a duration of 6 or 7 years, all of these jumps in the skyline because of the too much investment in how to create the image of a global city with all the glitzy skyscrapers. And you can see also how new kind of areas of the city was developed. This is the place where the Sheraton Hotel and Convention Center was built in late 80s. And this is the same area only after almost 20 years. So you can imagine also the pace of development. And again, I'm suggesting that this is related to the notion of Dubaification of the city. So you have a lot of skyscrapers in the new business center of Doha. And also you have a lot of iconic real estate development. This is a project called The Pearl, which is also, again, very similar to what happened in Doha, in Dubai and in Bahrain and other places in the Gulf. A lot of city reclamation, sea reclamation. And also, of course, the vertical development represented in all those skyscrapers. Now, the notion here is how to start posing and asking questions regarding, should I stay imitating somebody else, particularly after I realized that this model is not a successful one? Is it not the time to start your own narrative, to start your own story. And I think when we started to have those kind of questions crystallized, some factors and some events substantiated and cemented the idea towards moving from the notion of imitation to the notion of innovation. One of which, in my own opinion, and I'm not flattering Sheikh Moza here, but one of which is related to the vision of the leader. And the leader here is the lady that has outstanding aspirations about her country in a very critical manner. And this is what I like about her, in a critical manner in the sense that she is saying, we are consumers of knowledge. And this is fact. This is fact in the Gulf, and it's fact in the Middle East. We are importing everything, we are imitating, and it's about time, with all the resources that we have, to move to a situation where we can produce knowledge. So I think this is in itself was one of the key elements, in my opinion, to start helping in crystallizing a new identity and a new narrative for the city, the country, and also for how architects and urban designers can re-envision their roles. Another interesting notion, in my opinion, is related to, are you copying a global model if you are trying to brand your city, if you are trying to construct a brand, to construct an identity, to construct a narrative? Are you copying a global model, or you are copying the copy in the process of this Dubaification of Middle Eastern cities? So in the two scenarios, you are a loser, because in the two scenarios, you are copying. You are not coming up with your own story, as I said. Another very important event that took place also in 2010 was the declaration of Qatar hosting the FIFA 2022. And I think what was interesting in this particular turning moment was related to how you envision this moment. You envision it as a dream that was fulfilled, or you would invite your nation and you would invite your community to dream beyond the dream. And therefore, you're not looking only at the 30 days of having the competition in Qatar, but how all what you're going to do to host the event will create a legacy, will create a continuation of development that would help the local community, and it would help the nation or the cities and so on. And I will elaborate on that in more slides to come. So this has ended up with having, in my analysis, two main directions. One is related to knowledge-based urban development, and therefore the main architectural projects suddenly in Qatar are not skyscrapers. Most of the architects are coming now to do universities, to do research centers, to do state-of-the-art museums, to do an interesting specialized kind of schools, to do creative centers and incubators where people would come from all over the world to be engaged in research projects and knowledge production activities. And at the same time, there's another direction happening, which is the idea of the balance between local and global, and how you start to revisit your history, revisit your heritage, and preserve it, and also learn from it, which is also a very interesting notion. So, as I said, we started to construct the Doha as a model for knowledge-based urban development. And as I said, this was represented by a lot of cultural buildings, and I will elaborate on all of them: the Museum of Islamic Art, Qatar National Museum, the public libraries, universities, Education City, for instance. This is an amazing project representing the whole notion of knowledge-based urban development. This is a place where a group of top American universities are clustered in not gated community, but clustered in the center of the inner part of Doha, the in-depth part of Doha. You have places like Texas A&M, Georgetown, Cornell, Virginia Commonwealth, Northwestern. But what is interesting here is how to make this city interacting with the community, how to make it part of their daily life. It's not only about having a gated community dedicated to students and researchers. And we did a lot of design workshops related to that. So, for instance, one of the main elements that was added to the project is related to the main mosque, which is part of also of the College of Islamic Studies. The public parks and public gardens that are open for the people, the public library, which is designed by Rem Koolhaas, all of these public-based projects, community-based projects, facilitated the notion that Education City is not a gated community, but it's an accessible place, and therefore people would interact with such an outstanding knowledge center. You add to this that this is also a manifestation of the diversity of people. You're talking about people coming from more than 60 countries, students and professors and researchers. All of them are exchanging cultural values and ideas and inspirations. At the same time, you preserve the heritage, you look at the main assets of your history and you preserve it and you conserve it and you rehabilitate it. But at the same time, you allow architectural creative interventions to be included within the fabric of the city. Architecture that would provoke creativity, that would stimulate minds, that would invite people to ask questions regarding static values and regarding the notions of the minarets, for instance, or the appearance of the mosque. Another very interesting project, architecturally and also from an urban design of view, is the old center that I showed you in the map, the old center of Doha, which called Mishrab. And as you know, most of the Gulf cities, after the oil boom, the traditional core was really neglected and deteriorated. And in some cases, it was left only for maybe low-paid workers that would come and live there and divided and destroy some of the interesting features of this unique heritage. And Doha was not an exception in terms of that. So Mishrab was totally abandoned. In some situation, it was the center for low-paid construction workers. And then later, there was a lot of demolition to part of it. And then we started to look at it as a sort of a new concept of holistic revitalization of this important part of the city. So how you do that? You do that first by questioning what is happening. What's mainly happening, the main feature is what we call the scattered kind of architecture, the scattered kind of buildings that they are not that much connected. And therefore, people in the Gulf, they spend incredible time in their cars, moving from the mosque, to the shop, to the house, to the office, to the school, and so on and so forth. So it's about time, if you really care about the post-oil paradigm, to go for a more compacted urbanism, to go for a more connected kind of urbanity. And therefore, that was the sort of the main conceptual base for the project. Another very important conceptual base for the project was related to how you can, how you can use the local traditional architecture and also the regional architecture to come up with new language. Because as I said before, it's very important to learn from your history, not to imitate your history. So there was a lot of effort done in terms of analyzing the past, analyzing history, analyzing traditional architecture to end up with new vocabulary, to end up with new words and new compositions and new synthesis that would help. even the urban fabric that would also use to manifest a sort of an old yet new, a new yet it based on the old. And this is again very interesting in terms of even on the urban level, how you look deep in terms of the main principles that you were able to learn from traditional urbanity of Gulf cities, and you reintroduce it in a modern and contemporary manner. And at the same time, if you were able to preserve some of the old assets of this fabric, you do that. And you do it not only by preservation, but also by introducing new functions for all of it. And the important thing here, because as I said in the beginning of my lecture, I'm excited about the notion of people. The important thing also is how to engage people. So it's not only about architecture per se, but it's about the relation between people and places. And in this sense, the public places with its hierarchy from a very big plaza all the way to intimate public spaces are becoming very, very important, because this is also a sign of a more integrated and connected city. And we ended up with this as a sort of a very comprehensive project, which is, in my opinion, was a very interesting confrontation with the oil paradigm. This is what I called it, the oil paradigm, the skyline that was produced because of the petrodollars, as opposed to the other kind of model of development, architecturally speaking and planning speaking and urban design speaking, that are more based on the notion of people, the notion of looking at architecture as a sort of a language that can be based on the history, but it's coming up with a new contemporary vocabulary. The kind of project that would respect the relation between people and places, that would respect the sense of walkability, that would respect the scale of people rather than the mega scale of skyscrapers. And when it comes to the notion of the FIFA 2020, as I said, the question was not about hosting the event or taking the responsibility from Moscow in 2018, or being prepared even for the 2022. I think the more relevant question is, and then what? What would happen after that? And therefore, suddenly we started to have a new terminology used for the whole vision of having the FIFA in Qatar, which is the notion of legacy. And legacy here has a lot of it's a multifaceted kind of notion, because number one, it's related to how each of those stadiums is becoming an icon. It's becoming an interesting piece of architecture. Top architects from all over the world, and also one wonderful local architect, excuse me, Ibrahim Al-Jaida, participated in the design of the new required stadiums. But the most important thing is that each of those stadiums is going to create a sort of center of development within its district, within its precinct, within its zone. And therefore, once the competition is over, it's not going to be a repetition of what happened in South Africa or Rio de Janeiro, when people were so frustrated that after investing all this money, nothing was rewarded to them. But on the contrary, each stadium here has a legacy plan in terms of how this stadium would play a role in the overall quality of life in the area where it is located. And this is based on the notion of stadium in itself is a very flexible place. It can host marks, it can host celebrations, it can host activities, it can be considered as a public space, and so on and so forth. So each of those stadiums, because of this idea of legacy, has its own scenario in terms of the post-FIFA 2022 paradigm. I talked about the notion of architecture to provoke questions and to stimulate minds. So, and this is very important when you have this as a criteria for the architectural interventions in your city. Because when you start to have dialogues with different architects, practicing, and even in the evaluation of competitions, in the evaluation of projects, you will emphasize this, that you're not looking for a typical kind of boring projects, but you are more excited about projects that would create very interesting, very vibrant language of architecture. And this would lead me to the notion of star architects, because also in the Gulf, and again because of the financial resources available, we were able to hire top architects in the world. And I think for a good number of years, we totally surrendered to those architects. I've heard from a lot of top architects in the world that they were so much shocked that when they practice in the Gulf, no one would question them. On the contrary, some of them were hired just to do buildings. Zaha Hadid, she told me herself that she was hired one time and she asked, what is the project? And the answer was, it doesn't matter, do whatever you want. And I think what is important here, and this is why I'm stressing the notion of the legitimacy of the local dialogue. What is the role of local architects, even when it comes to allowing star architects to practice? I think we should create a dialogue with them because we have the local knowledge. We know more about our cities. We know more about our communities. We know more about our needs and aspirations and way of life. And I will provide for you some concrete examples about what I've said. One of which, excuse me, is the Qatar National Library designed by Rem Koolhaas. We had a lot of wonderful design workshops with Rem Koolhaas. And in those workshops, his outstanding creativity was acknowledged and praised, but at the same time, we were able to provide him with a different kind of understanding about what kind of community you're dealing with. Because we know that in the Middle East, we are not library goers. We are not museum goers. So the challenge for him was how to transform the library into a public space. How, while people just walking, they will feel almost sucked into the library. And once they enter the library, they will enter a space that would give them a feeling of a public space. It's a plaza, it's a saha, it's a baraha, rather than it's the typical place stacked with books. And not only that, we had workshops regarding the atmosphere in the library, how to make it very casual in the sense that people can eat, they can drink, they can, in some situations, listen to even music in some spaces where it's not going to affect the noise level or what have you. So suddenly, the library is becoming a destination. And I did a lot of insight research where I conducted a lot of interviews where people, they told me that their kids prefer to go to the library now more than malls. And this is, for people living in the Gulf, this is phenomenal, that kids would prefer to go to a library better than a mall. But when you start to insert this kind of new personality in the library, particularly the main space, and I have here to acknowledge the acceptance of Rem Koolhaas and how he respected the intervention of all the wonderful local young generation of architects and designers who participated in all of these workshops. And he gave a wonderful, wonderful lecture in the Canadian Institute of Architects talking about this project, where he said that I have to admit that the maturity of this project was the result of the wonderful dialogues and interventions from the local young architects. Another examples are related to the notion of museums, and I will quickly narrate with you two stories about the Museum of Islamic Art, IMP, and also the museum, Qatar National Museums by the Novell. This is the Museum of Islamic Art. It's a wonderful story, hiring IMP to do the project. He was so excited about the geometry of Ibn Tulun Mosque in Egypt, particularly the main courtyard, and the beauty of the geometric composition of the minaret and the courtyard. And he came up with an excellent interpretation of Islamic architecture, yet in a very contemporary manner. And he used the uniqueness of the site to create a sort of, again, a dialogue between the museum and the city. But to me, what is more important is the connection between the project and the community. Physical connection and also intellectual connection. Not only that, again, because of the workshops and because of the listening to the local community, a wonderful idea was inserted to complete the beauty of the museum and the role of the museum, which is relating the museum to one of the most vibrant public and green spaces in the city. And therefore, suddenly, you have a very vibrant place, a very vibrant green place with a lot of activities like bazaars and concerts and get-together parties and social activities and so on and so forth. And all of this resulted in a sort of a new sense of belonging between the museum and people and the green place. I remember when I was doing some research in the area, again, I did a lot of interviews, and I met this wonderful family, and I asked them, and I had a wonderful reply from the father. He told me, because of the beauty of the public place, we have picnics here almost on a weekly basis. And then my son told me, what is this big building over there? And I told him, I have no idea. He said, why don't we walk and ask? So they walked to the museum without knowing what is that. And they were invited because it's for free. And he told me, since then, going to the park and enjoying the park and the picnic all the time is coupled with going to the museum and checking the different components and the different galleries and so on and so forth. So that suddenly you have a very interesting relation again between the architectural icon, the public space, and the community. The same story again, the notion of the importance of the dialogue between local architects and star architects in the Qatar National Museum case. Because the museum actually is in the site where the old palace of the old ruler of Qatar was there. This same palace was transformed later into the very first Qatar National Museum, which is, you can see here, this is my hand depicting the old palace and how the new articulation of masses suggested by Novell. So the idea here is how, again, to convince a star architect with the scale of Novell to understand that you need to cope with this. You cannot destroy this. This is an important chapter of the city. It's an important chapter of the nation. And therefore, you have to use your creativity and you have to use your own interventions to respect the old and come up with a new kind of a dialogue between the old and the new and the different fabric of the city. And how the project is even connected, very much connected. So the notion of the blurred kind of boundaries, the notion of that you don't have walls, but you have a lot of places where you can literally interact and be engaged with the experience. This is very clear here, where you don't feel even going from in to out and out to in because of those blurred boundaries that I talked about. And again, as you can see in the picture here, it's as if you are depicting or you are manifesting or you are documenting the different chapters of the city in one image or one project. You cannot do all of that without also, I'm the kind of person that would believe in the notion of environmental design, holistic design. So architecture cannot survive without excellent planning and without excellent urban design. So on a planning level, there was also very important move towards the decentralization of Doha. As I talked in the beginning of my lecture, most of the Gulf cities are based on the horizontal development kind of approach. But you need to stop that, because this is also antithesis to the whole notion of the post-oil paradigm and the post-carbon paradigm and the notion of sustainability. So how to redesign the city into a number of centers, and those centers are celebrating the notion of compacted urbanism and celebration the notion of walkability, and celebrating the notion of transit-oriented development. We don't have to rely on our cars all the time. How also to engage people in using the public transportation. The metro was introduced, and not only introduced in a linear format, but it was introduced in a sort of a network format, 4 lines that would cover the whole city, and therefore people will start to realize that using public transportation is not a social degradation, and it's also good for your health and productivity, and it's enhancing social life and community interaction and so on. Even the notion of streets, how to move from looking at streets from the perspective of car-dependent entities, car-dependent spaces, and how to allow people to be engaged. And when I say people here, I'm talking about the local community, to be engaged in different kind of perception which is related to other good examples and best case practices in the world. This is the case of Maria-Hilfer-Straße in Vienna, where the street here is basically designated for people, and cars are totally marginalized, and public transportation is accessible via specific nodes or underground metro. And those are becoming the new model for reinventing streets in Doha. And you can see the traces of the transformation, particularly after introducing the public transportation. And hence, as you can see in the diagram, the whole notion of the decentralization of the city started to be crystallized. Not only that, again, from an urban planning and urban design perspective, how to deal with open spaces and recreation facilities as an important component of the quality of life. And therefore, one of the wonderful projects that is conducted now in the Urban Planning Authority in Qatar is related to create a strategy for open spaces and recreational facilities that would preserve and protect the natural ecosystem, but at the same time would respect the cultural heritage and help in creating a different kind of identity for the whole country, not only Doha. And the notion of public spaces also is becoming very, very important. For a long number of years, we were dealing with Gulf cities as places where the climatic condition will never help us to have vibrant, positive, livable public spaces. But we realized that that was a total fallacy. When you design the right public spaces with the right shade and shadows, with the right plantation, with the right scale, with the right activities, people would go there. People would go there and would enjoy it. And on top of that, most of the Gulf cities, at least they have 6 months or 7 months in the year where the weather is absolutely wonderful to enjoy outdoor activities. And all of this, as I said before, is also related to our understanding or the needed understanding for the notion of people. As I said, most of the Gulf cities, they have people coming from different places, from different cultural, ethnic, religious, and gender background. And the notion, the most important notion, in my opinion, is how, as architects and urban designers and planners, when we deal with places for people, we emphasize the beauty of this tapestry, the beauty of this diversity, and we use it to create architectural spaces and urban spaces that would speak to all of these people. And then the idea of...
Prof. Ali, we
yes.
have about 2 minutes just to wrap up.
So I will do that.
Yeah,
so
we can jump into the Q&As because
sure.
everyone's super excited.
Absolutely. And this is the final notion regarding the movement from negative reservation to positive reservation of history. So it's not only about restoration, but it's about injecting energy and transforming all those places into vibrant places, places that would be used by people. And therefore, as the case of Souq Waqf, it would create a different momentum in the city and people would use it and there would be a lot of social interaction in it. And at the same time, we need to be careful that we have also to be aware of what is happening beyond the architecture and urban spectacle in the city. We have to look at those tiny places where maybe unprivileged people or local workers are residing, and we have to consider how to enhance the quality of their life and preserve this unique way of using architecture and spaces. Gated communities, we need to be careful about that and how to stop the what I call the cities of walls and towers, and how to separate the using of the walls that would separate housing projects from dead streets in some cases. The leftover spaces, in some cases, it will be really huge pieces of land, should be considered. So to make a long story short, I think we are approaching a paradigm shift. And it seems to me that this paradigm shift in architecture and urbanism is based on this notion of people and how to create architecture and urbanism and planning related to people, how to create a balanced approach respecting the idea of the post-oil paradigm and creating a more future resilient development, and how we do that in a just manner, in a fair manner. And I think this would lead me to the very final conclusion, which I think the only difference is that all of the Gulf cities in the beginning of the end of the 20th century, they were more excited about the model of moving from a fishing village to a global city, imitating Singapore and New York and so on. I think what is important, and particularly it was manifested in the model of Doha, Qatar, is that you're moving from a traditional settlement, and therefore you acknowledge your history, you acknowledge the value of your heritage, and you're moving more towards creating the knowledge-based urban and architecture development, and hence you are moving more towards knowledge and creative city. And thank you so much, AIA, for having me. It was my honor. I will
Professor
stop
Ali,
the share
thank you
now.
so much.
I'm sorry for taking more time.
No,
I'm really
no
sorry
worries,
for that.
no worries. I think people wanted to hear. I believe if we had more time, we'd be able to extend the webinar at least an hour and a half. But we'll take 15 minutes, maybe a little bit more, to answer some of the questions that we have from our attendees. So one of the questions is, well, this is more of a statement. So I'm guessing the attendee wants to hear your response to that statement. The three paradigms mentioned are basically still produced as a result of oil economy. Iconic Dubai, Masdar City, and sustainable architecture, as well as a knowledge city, are all sponsored by the oil revenues. They are still built from top down. They are still elitist. I mean that all of these paradigms are elitist and function by the capitalist and entrepreneurship logic. There's no post-oil culture to produce the built environment. So what is your, response to this particular statement?
I would start by saying oil is the backbone, the economical backbone of all Gulf cities. This is a fact. Oil and gas, particularly, which is the carbon resources. Now, the question is, yes, all of these new paradigms that I shared were generated and financed by the revenues resulted from oil. But this is not bad. This is not wrong. I cannot blame Gulf governors or Gulf decision makers for doing that, because this is in itself a manifestation of the awareness of what kind of future we are approaching. So it seems to me that for cities like Manama, like Kuwait, like Doha, like Riyadh, like Jeddah, like Dubai, like Abu Dhabi, like Muscat, in different degrees, to realize that we have an opportunity now, that oil is still relevant and we still can sell oil, but the money coming from oil, we are not going to use it to build yet one more skyscrapers. We want to build it for a knowledge center, a research center that would engage our local community with also people coming from all over the world. So I cannot really see the problem of using our financial resources now to portray a better future.
So on to the next question. Thank you, Professor. This is from Nozan Naimi. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I'm just wondering about Doha's urban future. How could you imagine the future perception for Doha in terms of urbanism? I believe you had actually answered that question towards the end of your talk. So I think I believe it had been answered, unless you'd like to add maybe one additional point to it.
The only addition that I would say, Marwa, is I would even call it like that. The age of skyscrapers is over. I think the fundamental change that would happen is happening actually in Doha and a lot of other Gulf cities with different degrees, is related to how to create a narrative for those different cities using the oil revenues that would help to create sustainable and excellent quality of life for people without keeping on imitating the same model that was used in the 90s and the 2000s and so on. So there is a lot of signs for an excellent paradigm shift happening.
All right, next question. Just a quick reminder to the people asking their Q&A on the chat box. If you could move your questions to the Q&A section, that would be much easier so that these questions can be properly answered live. Thank you. All right, we have another question with how will the previous oil paradigm architecture, existing urban fabric, be integrated with the new knowledge-based paradigm? Do they interact with one another in a specific way? The question is related to Doha City.
Well, I think here you have two interesting parallels working together. And I totally understand the beauty of this question, because if you're talking about the pre-oil paradigm, you're talking about how to, as I said, how to understand the heritage. As I explained in the example of Mesherab, how to look at the history of the city on an architectural level and also urban level as a source of an inspiration, as a platform to come up with new ideas. At the same time, the knowledge-based architecture and urban development is so much related to the notion of history, is so much related to the notion of community, is so much related to what kind of local knowledge you have and how this local knowledge would interact with global knowledge. So you will see, for instance, in the case of Education City or in the case of Mesherab projects, you will see that the project as an urban and architectural intervention is a manifestation of the two directions. It's a manifestation of respecting the past and coming up with the new language in terms of architecture and urbanism, and at the same time, inserting the new kind of investment in the new kind of projects and the new kind of programs that would engage people in a different kind of productivity and would transform them into producers of knowledge, producers of research, producers of art, rather than being only consumers. Very interesting question.
So on to our next question. Education City, this one's actually an interesting one. Education City does have controlled access or security points. So it is not a simple walk through the neighborhood. How do you explain this?
Well, this is wrong. It's a wrong statement. We have to differentiate between a way to sort of intervene if you have a problem on the entry points or on the boundaries of the project versus that you cannot enter the place. So if you are going to Education City to go to the mosque or to enjoy a walk in the park or to go and grab a book from the library, you have 100% smooth access. No one would even stop you on the edges of the different kind of gates and access point to the project. And I have to confess here for you that in the beginning, and this is what I was trying to explain in my talk, in the beginning, Education City was treated as a sort of a gated community. It's a place where you have students, professors, and the different kind of university branches. But then after different cycles of interventions, listening to the community, listening to the voices coming from people living around the project, and also people integrated in the different community workshops that were conducted, we did realize the importance of transforming the project into a project for the city rather than a gated community. Hence, we started to say, what are the most important public projects that can be used to create a sort of a magnet for people? And you cannot find much better projects than a mosque, a public library, and a park. And this is exactly what was done in the fabric of the city. And therefore, Education City is becoming a destination now rather than secured. I mean, security, it's very important everywhere. You have even security on your own house. But the notion is you don't feel it. No one would stop you. It's becoming a very blurred boundaries rather than the concept of the gated community that the project start up with. And this is why I'm emphasizing the notion of talking to the community, community participation, different workshops, the notion of the post-occupancy evaluation, and so on and so forth.
All right. On to our next question. With the growth and development of iconic areas in the city, gentrification is happening very rapidly in many of the iconic cities in the Gulf. As such, what sort of consideration has been given to housing affordability?
Well, housing here, it's a complicated issue, of course, in the Gulf, because as I said, you have two streams when it comes to housing. Housing related to local families because they have their own kind of way of life and their own preferences. And also you have a lot of expats from different economical and educational and social levels and so on and so forth. And hence, in the project that took place in the Gulf in the beginning of the oil boom, witnessed incredible level of gentrification. And I totally agree about that. That was happening in Manama, in Kuwait, Doha, of course, and so on and so forth. And in most of the cases, the gentrification process took place in already deteriorated places or places where the local people already abandoned and used the money resulted from the oil boom to move to the suburbs, to move to the peripheries of the city. And therefore, dealing with those old cores of the city was much easier. It was not about forcing people out. And in the same manner, I would argue also that housing need to be needs to be more integrated. And this is why in the final slides of my presentation, I talked about the notion of gated community. I talked about the notion of fragmentation. I'm not that much excited about the separation in housing. I am more excited about interaction between different housing types, even interactions between locals and expats. So some of the research projects that I'm conducting in Qatar, for instance, one of which is related to the notion of housing neighborhoods and how to create housing neighborhoods that would be a manifestation of social interactions between locals and expats, rather than completing the same model of sprawling the cities, because every single Qatari family, they want to have an independent single house, and every single expat family, they want to resort to a protected kind of gated community. I think one of the challenges that we should approach, not only in Doha, but in all Gulf cities, is how to produce different kind of housing model that it's affordable, sustainable, compactable, but at the same time would allow a sort of speaking together, speaking to each other kind of housing and urbanism without a more positive, vibrant residential neighborhoods for both locals and expats.
So I'm going to actually apologize to the rest of the attendees profusely. We're actually over our time by half an hour. And I wish we can actually extend, but with our webinars, there might be conflicts with other meetings. So what we'll do, we'll take your questions. And once we post the YouTube video on our channel, we'll ensure that Professor Ali answers them thoroughly, even the remaining questions. So let me just share with everyone our social media outlets. So this is our website. If you have any queries about becoming a member with the AIA Middle East, kindly go through the membership page here and stay tuned for the AIA International Region Conference, in which AIA Middle East, in collaboration with the international region, shall be conducting their conference in conjunction with Dubai Expo 2020. You can follow us on LinkedIn at AIA Middle East, and you can also follow us for any upcoming talks. We have an upcoming talk on the 27th, which is also a launch of a, let's say, carefully curated bookstore for architecture and the arts. And of course, last but not least, our YouTube page, which I had mentioned, which you can visit, subscribe, and rewatch all the talks. You can also see my face again. For all of the remaining talks that we've had that cover different topics, everything from urban planning to the smallest aspect. And we look forward to your subscription. And as I had mentioned, we will be posting this talk on AIA Middle East, and we will ensure that the remaining questions can be answered as best as Dr. Ali can. And one last thing, I'd like to thank you, Professor Ali, for the time you had given us and the wealth of knowledge that you had shared with us. And I apologize for the very limited time that we have with you. And we hope that this is not going to be the first and last lecture that you do with us. The next one will hopefully be a physical talk rather than a webinar one. And one last thing before I end this talk, we are going to be partnering with Rusafa, which is as I had mentioned, an online bookstore of particularly curated architecture books and books related to the arts. It's a startup in Oman with a group of Omanis who have a passion for architecture, and they're hoping to not only stop in Oman, but also expand their services in the Gulf. So stay tuned for the 27th of January, and we will see you soon. Dr. Ali, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share with the attendees?
I just want to thank you and thank Mira for the wonderful preparation. And I want to thank all the audience. And I promise that I would answer all the questions in a very detailed manner, even in a written format, and I send it to them. And also they have my email if they want to elaborate more on other notions, because again, for the limitation of time, as you said, there are a lot of issues that we can elaborate on. My main purpose from the lecture was to introduce as much notions as I can about the new, what I called it, paradigm shift, but then we can elaborate more. Thank you so much.
And I'd like to finally thank our attendees for taking time on a Saturday to join us. Follow us on AIA Middle East Instagram account to know about all of the upcoming talks. And have a great night. Thank you, Dr. Ali, and thank you, Mega.
Thank you. Thank you
have
so much.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.